Have you ever run into an American who thinks you ride horses to school? I can't imagine.
I have, actually. I was in...
God, that person.
My parents went to the church and were a little like
this kind of feels like a cult.
Yeah,
like,
they told me that later. They were like,
yeah.
We were a little afraid.
Yeah.
Like the food, incredible. People have a passion for food there.
Yeah.
I had a very privileged life in terms of like, I wasn't hurt by the people around me.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Orbital Media Podcast, where we learn about human perspective, global cultures, and story one interview at a time. In our continuing series on American states and regional identity, we will be talking about the state of Texas. And today we are joined by Payton Bernhardt. Payton, would you like to tell the good people out there a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, obviously my name is Payton. I am from Texas. And I lived in a really southern part of Texas. Okay. So in San Antonio, Texas, a little bit south of that, there's a little town called La Vernia, Texas. Okay. Notably where Austin Mahone is from, if you know Austin Mahone. If you don't, that's fine. He's a music artist. But yeah, so that's where I'm from, and I'm really excited to get into it and talk to you guys about it.
Great. Well, it's great for you, to have you here, and I'm excited to learn a little bit about kind of your life growing up there, what it's like to be from this part of Texas. Obviously, it's a very big state, so I understand that this is your perspective and this is your personal experience, because you got like 29 million people there, and it's a pretty big landmass, and it's a very, very interesting state in a lot of different ways, right. Some of which we will get into. So I guess to start, if you were running into someone from outside the US, let's say, and you say, I'm American, they say, I'm from Texas, do people often immediately have a preconception of that, or do you follow that up with anything?
Yeah, people immediately are like, oh, so you're a cowboy.
Yeah, okay,
and you're like, what? No. And they're like, no, you ride horses to like school and stuff. And I'm like,
seriously?
Yeah. And I'm like, no, like that's not the thing. We have cars there. The Industrial Revolution happened.
The Industrial Revolution,
in Texas.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, or they'll like start to listen for an accent, and they'll be like, oh, you said y'all. And you're like, you got me there.
Yeah. And then what about people in the US? I mean, have you ever run into an American who thinks you ride horses to school? I can't imagine.
I have, actually. I was in...
God, that person, like...
I was in, like...
God, the hell's wrong with them?
I was in, like, 6th grade, and I was in this competition, and we had gone to Maryland. And they immediately pegged us as from Texas, because my accent was a little thicker then. Yeah, sure. I work really hard not to have an accent now. Okay. And they were like, you're from Texas. And I was like, how did you know? Talking like, how'd y'all know that? Yeah, and they were like, it's pretty obvious. And they're like, so do you ride horses around? And
really?
You're like a cowboy. And at the time I did ride horses. So I was well, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's start with the basics then. I mean, first of all, where is the state? It's a big state, but where is it for people who don't know? And we'll put a map up, right? But in the US,
LOL, for people who don't know where Texas is.
Yeah.
It is south. It borders Mexico. That's the best way I can describe it. Like in the center, that beautiful little, I like the shape of it. Yep. I think that's about as far as I would go with what I like from Texas.
And we will talk about that. This is going to be... See, I'm really excited to get into not just always the good things, but also talk about the, the darker aspects of any part of the world, because everywhere has that in different orders of magnitude, of course. Some places probably, in my opinion, more than others. Globally, I'm talking at a global level. And often we want to talk about the better aspects of where we come from and why we love our home, but there is more to life than just that, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, to get that whole breadth of views. So I'm really excited for this, and we'll dive in. And then what about, again, huge state, general kind of demographics of like traditional populations and also current populations of like your general sense of like when you're there, who are the kind of people that you're running into, and
Right. I think especially where I grew up in La Vernia itself, it was very heavily like white populated. Okay. There wasn't a lot of diversity, and if there was, it was like Hispanic, because you're so close to San Antonio. In San Antonio, the city, it's a greater like population of Hispanic people.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I think when you get into Austin, my experience, there's a lot of white people in Austin.
Yeah, Austin, yes. I would say Austin's a pretty white city.
It's a pretty white city. And then in Dallas, you get, because I went to school near Dallas, you get a little bit more diversity. So you have, Hispanic people, black people, white people, and those are the main groups that I saw in Dallas. And then in Houston, I've never been to Houston, but that's more diverse as well.
Yeah, I've actually heard that. I've never been to Houston myself. Yeah, to give a little kind of background on what I know about Texas and the time I've been there. So I've been to Texas 3 times in my life. I've been to Austin twice, and then I did one road trip from Dallas to Big Bend, all the way in the west of the state, and then back.
Okay.
And saw a little bit of a snapshot. But I've never been to Houston. I've never been to San Antonio. I've never been to a lot of the smaller towns in the state, other than the road trip from Dallas to Big Bend. And my understanding is it's now the second biggest state in the country in terms of population. It's almost 30 million people. It's traditionally it's been very much a both people view it outside of the US as the typical aspect of America, but it's also its own thing, and people there are like, no, we're Texans, we're not Americans. And the Texas identity has been a very interesting one for me to try to kind of figure out, and I'm curious to get a sense from you about that. My sense had always been as a kid and then as a youth kind of growing up, I didn't figure people rode horses to school or anything like that. They have vehicles, is that, but it was sort of like a mix of middle America with a certain portion of the South, a certain portion of Mexico and Mexican culture in the Southwest kind of blended together to create almost its own cultural region. I don't think of there being other parts of the country that you'd be like, oh, this state and this state and this state, and they're the whatever region. It's Texas is just its own thing.
It is.
I don't know, do you want to speak on that or
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe it, with the Midwestern values, because Texas, in the way that I experienced it, of course it's going to be different for everyone who lives there. But in the way I experienced it was a very heavy on religious values, traditional values, the man goes to work and provides for his woman, and and you're barefoot and pregnant. That was very much the picture that I got from Texas. And then my family is Mexican, so then I also experienced Mexican culture in a very close level that I thought everybody experienced, and then it took me, being an adult, to be oh, not everybody did experience that culture. So it was a very interesting blend for me, with living in a predominantly white town, but my family being Mexican, and just the values that were thrown to me. My dad is German, and his dad, my grandpa, is first generation. So they, immigrated from Germany. My mom is Mexican, and her mom is from Mexico. And then, we have a huge family because they're Mexican and they were Catholic, and so that it's 7 kids, 6 aunts and uncles. And then the kids that they all had was a lot because, hardcore family values.
Sure.
And so I have a lot of cousins, and some of those cousins married dreamers who were illegally brought over.
Yes. Okay.
And then my dad, worked as a state trooper. And so there was a lot of is that conflict with your dad because they're illegal? And it never was, because they're family, and it's no, it's not a big deal. But it's he was a white guy and German, and my mom is this Mexican woman, and they came together and created a family, and it was those two sides that you're talking about literally came together in my life. And so it was really interesting, where I was no, people get along. My dad is fine with my mom's Mexican side of the family. He loves them. My Mexican side of the family was a little wary of my dad. But venturing out into the world, it's you encounter those pockets where it's the sides do not like each other. They are very prejudiced and racist to a certain extent. And you experience a lot of that in the culture. And so it is like a really interesting, like, fine line to walk, and very confusing for me growing up the way I grew up to be like, whoa, this is not like what I thought the world was.
Did you find, and I mean, exactly to your point, like, it sounds like your ancestry in some ways is this really good example of, like, the different groups of people that came to Texas and created this sense of an identity, where you've got the sort of Northwestern European Anglo-American aspect, and then you have the Mexican Latin American aspect basically meeting in this state, and forming that identity. Did you find in your own personal life, when you were going through the world and living in Texas, that you felt, I don't know, either more akin to one group or another, or did you feel you were like, you kind of had a foot in both worlds essentially, and you'd, as I think I'm using this term maybe incorrectly, but like you'd almost code switch a little bit, or did you notice like certain areas everyone kind of seemed to get along, and then other areas it was like, oh, people really hate each other, and anything in that? Yeah,
definitely. I think we spent a lot more time with my mom's family. I am a white woman. I grew up ethnically Mexican.
Okay. I don't want to say like, can you unpack that? But you mean like in the sense of your cultural?
My cultural identity is Mexican.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so that's where I identify a lot. That being said, I am a white woman.
Right. So, and also the fact that Mexican, there are people who are white who are from Mexico, right? Mexican is not an ethnicity; that is a nationality.
That is a nationality. And so it's like I navigate the world as a white woman. So when I would encounter those pockets of like racist or I was very like, fuck you. But also it didn't come down on me the way it would have for like my little brother, who is a darker complected Hispanic young man. So the way that I navigated those pockets was like you said, code switching, where it was like very easy for me to like in a workplace with a bunch of like Hispanic women, I knew how to get in good with the Hispanic women. Like I knew the like things to mention where they were like, oh, you're not just like
some white girl. Some white lady who
who we don't like trust. It's like, oh, your grandma is from Mexico. Oh, your mom is Mexican. Like, oh, okay, we'll protect you. We'll like hang out with you. We'll like take you under our wing. So it was a certain level of like code switching, and it was like once I got out of the safety of my family that I really like had to be like, wow, what does that mean? And take a deeper look into like my role in like racism and like perpetuating that and what that looks like. And so there was like a lot of hard work to unpack all of that, especially growing up in Texas in a really religious, environment where they like to say like, we don't see color. And then being like, no, you should see color and you should celebrate color. And it shouldn't be something that, blocks people out of your community. But you had, and especially like hardcore German communities are tight-knit like that. Polish communities, there's like a certain, like Poth is a town that's like very much Polish. And they're very tight-knit, don't like outsiders, don't like other ethnicities. And I lived in Poth for a little bit. And so that was like an experience of like being accepted by them, but understanding my family and the things that I identify with would not be accepted.
I say, yeah.
And so that, it was just like it was weird growing up.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, I thought everybody was like Mexican.
Right, yeah. Well, and actually, even aside from maybe you, but like other people in your life, did you feel that dynamic between sort of white Anglo-Texans and then kind of Mexican-American Texans, if we want to use these terms, if those terms are kind of work for you, the level of friendship versus hostility versus neutralness, I guess, like, they're just people, whatever, we'll go. Like, did you feel that there were clear trends between where you were in the state, or like it just depended on the individual, like people are, different people are going to have different views, or were there like certain themes of like, it seems people think X or people think Y,
Yeah, I think it definitely correlates to like socioeconomic status.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think the poorer the town, the more the poor white people were racist.
Okay.
Because I think they were trying to differentiate themselves from like, well, at least I'm not X.
Yeah.
I may be poor, but I'm white.
Yeah.
And there was like that like line in the sand. I feel like in middle class like communities, it was like, I don't see color. People are people, people are people.
Right.
But like, who are you hiring for your help?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like there was a clear trend of like who they were hiring, and they're like, well, I'm helping them. And there was that clear mindset of like, I don't see color, but there is a certain demographic that is going to work for me. And then I feel like when you get into higher levels of socioeconomic status, which I wasn't ever privy to, I feel like it gets a little more insidious, a little trickier. They're not so outwardly open with it. But, it's like systemic racism is like systemic. It's insidious. It permeates through all.
And then how did you see similar or maybe different cultural trends in, and again, let me know what term you prefer. I was going to say in the Latino community or the Mexican American community. Like, how did you see that, if that was a world that you also were in?
Yeah.
How did that manifest on the opposite side?
Yeah, I think like personally, I laugh about it. It's probably not funny, but like my grandma lives in a very like poor part of town. Her mom had the house. Her mom's mom had the house. She was born in that house. She knows the neighborhood. She knows the people. They're all Mexican, and they have a community. And
was this near where you were growing up? Or
this was about 30 minutes north of where I grew up.
Okay.
So I grew up in La Vernia, which is south of San Antonio, very white.
So this is close to San Antonio, or like
She is in San Antonio proper.
She's in San. Okay.
And she lives like near downtown. And I remember like they're kind of gentrifying her neighborhood. Not kind of, like they definitely are gentrifying her neighborhood. And there's like a house that got like redone, and somebody bought it, and I was talking to her and I was like, oh, like, love you, grandma, bye. And she was like, Mija, come here. And I was like, what? And she was like, did you see who bought that house? And I said, no, who bought the house? She goes, a white lady. And I said, Grandma, I'm a white lady. And she was like, no, you're Mexican. And I was like, no, like, I'm white. And she was like, I post no. A white lady bought it. And I was just like, okay, are we feeling a little like prejudice towards white people, which I'm like completely understand, because she's feeling like this encroachment in her community, and it's scary. And you used to never see like white people walking through that neighborhood. I mean, my family was the only white family. Like me and my dad were like,
right, the only two white people like in the town. It's like, hello,
we're like, hello,
yeah.
we're with them. And it was just like funny to see her be so like protective over her community, and a little bit sad, but also a little shocking, because like my grandma married a white man, even though she's like Mexican. And so it does, like, she married a white man. Some of her children are half white. Some of them are fully Mexican. Her grandchildren are white, black, Hispanic, like they're all different races. And yet she has this like prejudice towards this white woman that she doesn't know.
I'm actually curious if you want to get into this, sort of like some of those cultural group dynamics again. And I want to be clear, like, this is in your experience, right? This is not like everyone in Texas or anything. This is like for you personally. But there is this interesting metaphor, it sounds like, to the state and your family. Like, what were some of those cultural dynamics that you noticed that were different between groups of like Latina girls, Latino women versus like white girls, white women in Texas? And obviously I mean that in Latino is a tough topic, because like that includes a variety of people of different ethnic backgrounds,
different cultures.
I'm talking about this in a cultural sense, not in a like a skin color sense. Because again, like the whole Latino topic is not just
it's
like
nuanced.
It's really nuanced. I mean, you could talk for hours about that, and like that's one of the things I'm trying to do a little bit also more with interviewing people and get a sense of like understanding Latin America and like the dynamics and how complicated the world is. But if we're viewing this in cultural terms, let's say, when we use Latina girls, Latina women, white girls, white women in cultural terms, like what were some of those differences you noticed in like the groups within Texas?
I think it's like a part of it is race makes a difference. And I think the other part is socioeconomic status. So a lot of the white girls I was friends with came from more affluent families. Okay. And I felt like the difference in being with white women was like this idea of like white feminism, where it's like, I support it as long as it works for me. And as soon as I'm inconvenienced, I bow out. And I felt like that went beyond just politics. I think it went in like interpersonal things as well. So like the white women I was friends with really valued like stability in the friendship. Like if they did something wrong, they didn't want you to tell them they were wrong. That was like a mortal offense. It was like, we're fighting, we're falling out, we are done. Like there was no accountability there. Which I think is like partly because being white requires less accountability, like in the society we have set up. And then I think another part of it is the socioeconomic status. Like you grow up with a certain level of wealth. There's a certain level of like accountability that you no longer have to work with. And so it was like a combination of those things where it was just like the girls were a little bit cattier, more manipulative, like they wouldn't outright say what they were thinking, which is what I was used to. I would take things at face value because my family's very loud and very like, if they say fuck you, it's like, fuck you, I love you, come here. And you're like, okay, I understand. Where like with these groups of white women, it wasn't like that. It was like, oh, like you are wearing that today? And you're like, yeah. They're just like, okay.
Yeah, it's like Mean Girls.
And you're just
like Mean Girls.
Whoa, what does that mean? Where like when I was friends with more like Latina women and like specifically Mexican women.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too.
Because
we want to be
Texas,
clear. Like we're talking about Mexico specifically within Latin
this
America.
Is where
not,
these,
not
this
just
is where
all
these
Latin America,
like girls' culture came from.
They're from Mexico specifically. Yes.
Yeah, it was way more clear to me. Like there was clear boundaries. I understood like we could say things to each other and be like, "Hey, that was fucked up," and they would be like, okay, like I see that and I hear that and like moving forward I won't do that. Yeah. There was more accountability and there was just more like camaraderie. Like it wasn't like an individual like I'm rooting for me and as soon as you get in my way, it was more like I'm rooting for us and like as a group very supportive and like you could like, and both groups were very religious, so I'll put that context in there too.
And I do want to get on that, actually, the Protestant Catholic thing in a second, but please continue.
But like, you could be like sinning with my friends who were like Latina, and they would tell you like, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing that, but like, I'm gonna love you anyway. Where like, if you did that with the white group of friends, it was like, oh, you spent the night at his house? Well, wait till the church elders hear about this. And you're like, wait, what? Like, or are you gonna rat me out and like, you know, betray me like that? And it was just like there was just so many differences and so much nuance in both sets of groups. And like, I'm still friends with my Latina friends that I had, you know, I'm not friends with the groups of white girls that I was with, that I grew up in, you know, that Lavernia small town with. So it was like a very different experience, and one I obviously fit in better and people understood why I was friends with them, and then one people were a little confused and were like, why are you friends with her?
So your point about both groups and kind of you know, the dynamics there, you mentioned religiosity being very important in both groups, and to get back to this idea of the kind of dual cultural aspect of Texas, the Latino aspect and then the sort of Northwestern European, white Anglo-American aspect. traditionally, right, we think, talking about white Anglo-Americans, Protestant, Mexican-American, Latino, Catholic.
Right.
Going way back in the day, obviously there were a lot of conflicts between those religions. Was there anything that you noticed between Catholics and Protestants in terms of conflict or in terms of getting along as Christians? Like, was there any notable dynamic you noticed between that, or was it sort of just like, yeah, those are just XPs for our different cultural groups?
There was conflict, and I think it came, like, I don't think Catholics cared about Protestants, like, in the way that I interacted with them.
Okay.
Like, I think they were just like, you're kind of weird. Because I did not grow up religious, and then got saved. I put that in big quotes.
I'm curious to get on. I want to talk more about that, actually. If you're talking about
Another one of these. But so I got saved at like 14 and was pulled into Pentecostal churches.
Okay, and for people who don't know what Pentecostal is, what is Pentecostal?
Pentecostal is like a sect of Christianity that is, and these are in my own words.
Sure, yeah, of
so
course.
like theologians,
yeah,
be nice to me.
Yeah, of course.
But like,
be nice in the comments.
They are just a little bit more intense about their faith, about evangelizing people. Like, they are just wound up a little tighter. So that's where I fell in.
Do you want to talk, if you're interested, if you want to, about your sort of life in terms of the religion in Pentecostalism? Or should we move on to a different topic?
No, I'm totally open to talking about it. How much time do you have?
I got all day. I mean, it's we're hanging out on a Saturday. It's 4:11. We're only like one drink in, you know.
There's a lot
to unpack. Let's do it.
There's a lot to unpack.
Let's do it. Whatever you want to talk about, you know, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, the Christian aspect of it was really interesting because in the beginning it felt like, okay, I'm 14, my family was really crazy. I mean, insane crazy. Like, batshit crazy. Like, you wouldn't believe me if I told you stories crazy.
Now you've got my interest. It's just, we don't need to go there, but...
Like, we were friends with meth heads and meth dealers crazy. Okay. You know, like, that was like my uncle was meth head, and he wasn't related to me at all. By blood, it was like a whole thing, and he was sleeping with my teacher. My teacher was selling meth to students, and it was a whole thing.
Sounds like a real Breaking Bad setup kind of there.
It was a whole thing, and so when I encountered the church, it felt like really amazing to have answers to everything, and to have these rules by which to live by. Because like for 14 years, I had no rules. And like, that's not to say that my parents didn't discipline me or like keep me safe, but the chaos of the world was just too much. Like, and there was just too much pain that I saw that I didn't necessarily suffer. And I had a very privileged life in terms of like, I wasn't hurt by the people around me that very well could have hurt me. Like the alcoholics, the drug addicts, creepy guys that probably shouldn't have been around. You know, like, I wasn't hurt by those people, but everyone around me was. So I saw a lot of darkness, and I saw a lot of like just disgusting, like horrible, awful things happen to people. And going into church, it was like all of that can be left behind you, and all you have to do is accept Jesus into your heart. And it was like, done. That is so easy. Like, why would I not? And so I did that, and then it was like, welcome, and now we have 5 billion rules that you must memorize and follow, lest you go to hell. And it was like, okay, well, I can do that. And then it was like this insidious, like, you work really hard and you're like trying to follow the rules, and, you know, like, you're at the age where you're interested in boys and you like really want to make out and have sex. And it's like, that will send you to hell. And so I feel really bad for my first boyfriend. I feel really bad for him because he dealt with a lot of that like existential dread in me, where it'd be like, he's looking to like get lucky and I'm like sobbing. He's like,
the eternal problem between men and women, you know.
Like, oh man, I was hard, but not anymore. And I was just like, I'm going to hell. And he was like, I don't think it's that crucial. And I was like, no, you don't understand, because I bought 100% in. And I call it a cult because it's Pentecostal and it felt like a cult, like it was brainwashing. And this idea that when you walk in, you're accepted, but when you're in, you have to be so emotionally broken down for them to build you up from scratch.
In their image, of course, so then you are pliant and under their control.
Exactly. And so there was this mantra of like, you are not good enough. You are bad. You are evil. Your desires of your heart will lead you to hell and Satan himself. Like the thoughts you have that are like, maybe I like girls, which was very much my experience. I'm bisexual. And that thought was like from the devil. It wasn't a real thought that I had. And so it was like completely stripping away everything about yourself, which is really damaging to a 14-year-old girl, to be like, you are inherently evil, which is what we were told. Like, you were inherently bad. You were born bad. You were born under sin. And that was told to you every day. And then you start to believe it. You start to believe like, well, my will and my desires are bad. So therefore I must rely on God. And then came the prophets, which were normal people like you and me, but they had a word from God. And from God.
Yeah, well, you put that in serious air quotes.
And they would tell you essentially what to do. Like, they would pick you out of a crowd. It would be like, they would play worship music, so you're crying and you're like emotionally distraught, and like you're bad and you know you're bad and you've sinned because you thought about having sex and you're 15 and your hormones are at an all-time high, so of course you thought about sex. And like, you disobeyed your parents, and because parents are infallible, you know, like in this religion, parents do no wrong, even though they're people and will do wrong. And so you're like sobbing, and then this prophet will come on stage and like pick you out of the crowd and bring you up on stage and lay his hands on your head and be like, you are called by God to do something mighty. And then you just feel like, oh my God, like God has chosen me. And he's like, yes. And then I remember this distinctly because this happened to me, where it's like, some people are called to go to a big school. It's not you. You need to go to a small school. And the school that they were affiliated with was SAGU, which is where I went. And of course he told me to go to SAGU because they were affiliated. I
was gonna say they're gonna have their people there
SAGU
to keep you on the pipeline.
Exactly.
To keep you in the pipeline.
So of course they would go, and then they would. Another prophet told me, Payton, I just want to talk to you. And I was like, okay. And he was like, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get a word from God. It's gonna be so good. And he was like, you've seen some darkness. And I was like, fair enough. And he was like, and now there's like bright, like goodness in your future, but you'll get everything you ever wanted. You'll have a lovely life. And then the enemy is going to take it all from you. He's going to kill your husband. Your children will disappear, like they will die. And you will be tested in your faith at that time. And you will have to turn back to God. And I was like, what?
Yeah, right. You're like, that's an awfully specific prediction to me as like an 18-year-old.
Is that just the story of Job?
Yeah.
That's just a Bible story. But I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it's still to this day that haunts me. Even though I am deconstructed from Christianity, I no longer consider myself a Christian. I consider myself agnostic. That particular prophet that whatever he said, it haunts me to this day because I have gotten everything I've wanted.
Sure.
Like, I have a wonderful husband. I am working in an industry that I love that will hopefully pick back up after the strike.
We'll see.
We'll see.
The world turns, things change.
Yeah, we'll see how that
We will see what happens in
turns out.
conventional film and TV, but interesting times for sure.
You know, it's still storytelling is something I love. I got into UCLA, like I have everything I want, and I still to this day am traumatized and think like, oh my God, my husband is going to die. And this is exactly what he predicted, that I would like walk away from God and get everything I wanted, and then it would be taken from me. And I did walk away from God and got everything I wanted. And so it still is so insidious, and you're taught that these prophets speak the absolute truth of God. Like, it is not their thoughts, it is God speaking through them. And so it's like this all-powerful being giving you this thing, and that's really hard to shake after like 10 years in the faith. But it was really strange, and there was like so much misogyny laced into it. Like, I remember being a part of like a performance troupe, which is I was a part of an improv comedy troupe that was all Christian.
And like Pentecostal Christian.
Christian.
Yeah.
And so it was not funny. It was not a funny troupe by any means.
It's funny how that happens when you have insane levels of censorship, and you will do this, you will not do this. If you do this, we will throw you out. And they're like, be funny now. And you're like,
I tried.
Yeah.
And I remember we went to a church to perform, and they said that the women could not get on stage to perform because that is a form of preaching, and women should not preach to men. And it was like, what? Like, what if I'm smarter than you? Like, what if I am more divinely appointed than you? And it was like, no. Women do not teach men. And they would have like a dinner table of like women with a 4-year-old little boy. And if it was time to say grace, the women did not get to pray. The 4-year-old little boy had to pray because he was a man.
Right.
And he did the blessing. So it was like an intense level of misogyny. And I was raised intensely feminist, like before I got saved. So that was always something that like I butted heads with the leaders with. And I was never very good at submitting. I'm still not good at submitting to authority.
You shouldn't be. Yeah,
It's just never going to happen for me. And that was a really big struggle, and especially when I worked at the mega church, because, you know, the way my faith went was I got saved at 14. I questioned it in high school because I really wanted to have sex, and just didn't because I didn't want to go to hell. And then I went to Sagu because that prophet told me to, and I thought that was the divine word of God, and Sagu was a hellhole. Its full name is Southwestern Assemblies of God University. All of the professors hate me, so I feel fine in trashing them.
I mean, you know, that's sort of how I go through my life in terms of if you're dealing with people in a cult-like setting of any culture or background or whatever, and you're like, oh, those people hate me, I'm probably doing something good.
I'm just fine.
Yes.
And I went to that school, and I started deconstructing while going there, which was really hard because you went to chapel every day. And then you had to go to church on Sunday or they would fine you for money. Like, you'd have to pay them if you didn't want to go to church. And so I started deconstructing while I was there, not knowing what it was. And I had professors sexually harass me. I had the dean sexually harass me. I had students sexually harass me. And like in public, like out and open, like a professor was like, we were doing a short film and he was casting for a prostitute. And we were like talking about who we liked. And he goes, no. Prostitutes have big boobs and they have a big butt and they're like sexy. Payton, I actually think you would be perfect for the role. And I was like,
you serious?
Huh? And everyone was just like, yes, she would. Yes. And I was like, what? No, you can't say that. And he's still to this day mad that I exposed him for that, and
Good. Well, I'm glad.
threatened another student who liked my tweet to like destroy her career because she liked the tweet. He's small, very small man, and if you're watching this, fuck you.
Fuck you.
But
You heard it here.
that's neither here nor there. And so when I got out of SAGU, I was deconstructing. I got a job at a mega church because it was the only thing that was hiring me and would pay me, because I went to a small, not well-connected school.
Kind of vaguely cultish.
Yeah, so who's going to hire
Vaguely
you?
cultish school.
Like another cult. And then I went to John Hagee's church called Cornerstone.
So who is this John Hagee figure?
John Hagee is a megachurch pastor who has millions of followers, and he heavily supported Trump. Like heavily supported Trump. He is staunchly pro-life, which most Christians are, but to the point where it's like, even if it's rape, you have the baby. And it's like, whoa, dude. What the fuck are you talking about? He is staunchly anti-gay. Like anything to do with the LGBTQ is just like absolutely not. A walking, talking nightmare. He is awful. And I worked there for a year, and it was the most sexually frustrated place I have ever worked in my life. Like the amount of men that it was rumored I was sleeping with was unmatched, and I was a virgin at the time.
And you're, at this point, this is after, so you're like 22, 23 at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Still a virgin, still hoping that I will wait till marriage. And pastors are telling rumors that I am sleeping with my coworkers who have wives and children. And I'm like, you're a children's pastor. Why would you start that rumor? So it was insane. And then like the men who are married are having me, because John Hagee had a full functioning studio, like top-notch equipment, better than some of the sets I've been on that are real sets. Like it's a legit studio. And they would have me do camera tests. And the men who are married with children, who are my age, they are like 50, 60 years old, these men.
The children are your age.
Their children are my age.
Okay. Yeah.
They would sit behind a camera and have me like move around, and would zoom in on my chest to watch my boobs like move. And I was so mortified when I found out, and like stormed up to a guy I thought was my friend and was like, why wouldn't you tell me? And he was like, oh, I didn't want to embarrass you. And I was like, it's more embarrassing to not have told me. And so by then I was like heavily deconstructing, because I was like, these men of God, these women of God are awful. If this is God, I am good. I'm good. And was like reading the Bible and seeing contradictions in the Bible. And I had read that thing back to front to back. And eventually was like, I cannot stay here another minute. And I applied to UCLA on my lunch break and got in, and was like, holy shit, I'm moving. And then I came to California, and it was a huge culture shock. And I still considered myself a quasi-Christian because I wasn't ready to let that go. And then eventually met like my husband, my now husband, and his friends, who were all men, and like not one of them objectified me. When I spoke, they listened. Like they didn't make fun of me when I had questions. And I was like, whoa, like this is crazy. This is crazy stuff. And he was like, this is human decency.
Yeah, this is called basic morality. And
this is just people being people. And I was like, I am in shock. And then it deconstructed from there. And now I'm, with a theology degree that I like to argue with Christians.
Which, I mean, to be honest, though, that isn't something that I would say is worthless, because it does, when you go through such an ordeal as that and you come out the other side, what you've studied is still valuable in terms of you understanding, like, here's why something is nonsense and here's why I can now argue that point, rather than being like, oh, it seemed bad, I'm going to stay away from it, but I'm now very uneducated on that subject.
Yeah, no, I'm very educated on like Christianity, and very educated on the Bible, and very educated on theology, specifically for Pentecostal. Like Baptist, I don't know. You know, like Lutheran, I don't know. They could get me on their theology, and I'd be like, ooh.
Or Anglicans, who are just the sort of, as Eddie Izzard said, the cake or death school of Christianity, which is like, just have a nice piece of cake and cup of tea and just sort of like hang out.
Yeah.
They're probably the most, I'm not generalizing here, but probably the most chill of all of the problems. As I said, the different startups, some of them are batshit insane. Some of them are just like, we just eat cake and we hang out.
I totally respect it. And like, I still have friends who are Christians who are still like deeply devoted to their faith, and I'm fine with it. I'm like, you know, whatever path you choose to take. I mean, it's still a little part of me is like, you could be happier, but that's not my call to make. And whatever path you choose to take, that's none of my business. Like, as long as you're not hurting other people, then that's fine. And it's certain friends are more loosely associated with Christianity, and those are people that I'm closer to. I have one friend who's deep, deep, deep in her faith, and it is hard for me to remain close because I think like the people you're voting for are harming oppressed communities.
Do you feel, and this is again, observing this as an outsider, I was always sort of, again, brought up in a, not like I was ever like militantly atheist or anything, but just sort of very much, as I said, ideologically agnostic, culturally Judeo-Christian, is what I would say. What you're describing sounds like very much, basically a cult, like a Christian sub-cult. And my question is, was your feeling that when you were talking to people who were Catholic, who were like Protestants, but the branches that are, let's imagine, hopefully more chill, like there was a much wider range in terms of their views on things? Or did you find like, no, actually there were certain thematic through lines that they were spouting that maybe they were less extreme, but they were still what I was encountering? Like I could see where that road led, or was it like, no, this was like a different thing, and I was like kind of in a cult?
No, there are definitely thematic through lines, and I think one of them that I see posted a lot is this idea of umbrellas, which I don't know if you've ever heard of this idea of umbrellas. You have Christ, you have your husband, you have your wife, and you have your children. And under each umbrella is a domain. And the wife does not go to Christ. The husband goes to Christ and gets word from God and gives it to his wife. And that is the biblical order of things. And I see a lot of churches preaching that. And I think that is like very much a cult mentality of like, you have one guy that like can commune with God. As a woman, you cannot. And I think it's very controlling. And I think that is really scary. And that is like everywhere in all churches I've encountered. But like, I think the Pentecostal sect itself had some very cult-like things in specific. Like, a church was its cult. Like, you would take your word of your pastor over the word of someone else who's equally qualified, because that's your pastor. And so you idolize this one guy and you follow this one guy, and this one guy has the power to give you blessings, and this one guy has the power over your life to be like, I think you should stay with your abusive husband. And you would stay with your abusive husband. Or he would talk to young girls about their sex lives, and that was okay. You know, like that was like, yes, that is your elder and you follow him, and he. So I think in that aspect, Pentecostal specifically was very cult-like in itself. I think there are themes that stretch over to other
branches
of Christianity that I think are harmful, and that I think are misogynistic. but they're not. I haven't seen them as cult.
As yeah, and sort of it's
like
the
worshiping this rock star pastor. You see it a lot with mega churches where it's like the deeper you get into a mega church, the more cult-like it becomes. Like I had a friend who is really deep in, like I said, her faith and serves really closely with pastors in this non-denominational Pentecostal glob. And I mean, they are intense. They put spyware on her phone and will look through her text messages, and she is not allowed to text a boy one-on-one. There has to be another person in the group. And like, that's just one aspect she told me, and I freaked out, and so she doesn't tell me anymore. Because I was like, oh my God, that is not okay.
Yeah.
Like, you have a right to privacy, and you have a right to like talk to who you want to talk to. Yeah. Like, that's insane, that's controlling. And she didn't see it that way. She saw it as they were trying to hold her accountable to like purity standards. And purity culture is a whole other.
Do you want to talk about that? Or
yeah, we can talk about purity culture.
Let's talk about it.
Purity culture is insane, and it's throughout all churches that I've encountered, Pentecostal or otherwise. And it's the idea that you wait until marriage to have sex, which is fine, whatever. Wait until marriage if you want to. But it's more so focused on the women. And it is more so like done in ways in which it tears down women's worth and equates them to objects. Like, I remember sitting through a few lessons on purity where they would give you like a rose. I don't know if you've heard of this. They would give you a rose, and there was one rose, and they were like, pass it around, feel the petals, touch the rose. How gorgeous is that rose? And everyone was like, yeah, it's great. Yeah. It's a fucking flower. Yeah, right, yeah. Cool. And then by the time the rose got back, because there was like 50 kids, the rose would be a little wilted and crumpled. And the pastor would go, this rose is your virginity, girls. And the more hands that you touch it, the uglier it becomes. And the uglier you become. And it was like, what? What about him?
Right.
And it's they're like, no, he's fine.
Right, yeah, see, that's sort of the logic argument, right? It's like, there's the line of reasoning of you're doing that for both genders, and it's like, hey guys, here's a banana, and we're gonna pass it around. Now and it's all like, brown and bruised, like, it's gross, like, people don't have, it's like, all right, well, that's a logical line of argument.
Yeah.
You may or may not agree with that viewpoint, but you're like, all right, we're keeping it balanced for both, or if it's just like, hey, go nuts, but if it's like, boys, you're fine, do whatever you want, right? And then in this case,
then the women,
of course,
or like they would give you a piece of gum,
yeah,
chew it up, and they'd be like, that's your virginity. And look, who wants this gum?
Right.
No one. No one will want you if you're not a virgin. And so it was like equating women to objects is the big crux of purity culture. And it's just this really gross thing where they do like, oh, I remember I did it. Oh, they did they did purity ceremonies where you would go up and your dad would give you a purity ring.
I've heard of purity rings, yes.
Yes, and it would only come off for your wedding ring.
Right.
And it was a reminder to stay pure. But it was specifically your dad had to give the daughter this purity ring. And it was like him telling her, like, you are my property. Your virginity belongs to me until you get a husband. And then you give that gift to him. But guard it now, which is really gross and really icky and like, ugh. Yeah. And I think my dad was really uncomfortable because I was really into this cult and my parents were not.
How did that happen?
They got saved. And then I found this small Pentecostal church that my friend was going to and immediately liked it because it was just so like the smoke and the lights and the music and the cool pastor.
And you would mention, especially if you have a childhood where you personally are not suffering tremendously, but you can see darkness in other people's lives and this feeling of, oh my God. And like, oh, I can go to this place and I'm going to be safe and like everyone's going to like me. Yeah, that you're much more vulnerable to be sucked in.
Yeah, and my parents went to the church and were a little like
this kind of feels like a cult.
Yeah,
like,
they told me that later. They were like, we were a little afraid.
Yeah.
And I was like, why didn't you pull me out of it? And they were like, well, we thought this was a better alternative than like you drinking or getting pregnant or doing drugs. Like we
at
thought
16 or whatever.
Like at least 15, she's like found a good hobby. And they just kind of like, you know, when the lights went down and people spoke in tongues, my dad was like, I'm scared. And my mom was like, me too. And I was just like, yeah. And they were like, oh no, what have we done? Crazy.
I mean,
and that's not. And I know we're focused on Texas.
Oh no! At this point, we're just into your life. At this point, like we're like most of the way through the interview. Like, but this is the thing, though. This is like why I want to get in this, because this, you know, it's easy enough for me to be like, oh, like what's the food like, what's the weather like, and stuff. But like to get into the personal stories, and you know, increasingly, I'm viewing this as a discussion with you about your experience in basically a cult, a Christian cult in Texas, and how that shaped you and how you came to understand the world and how you saw what was really flawed about this. And that's what I mean. I'm interested in just understanding these things. It's not like, hey, you didn't answer the question about like what's the favorite food of Houston, Texas. We're way beyond that point here.
Well, to bring it back to Texas, Texas is very religious. And that is very normal. And I think a lot of people's experience in Texas is this super fanatic church experience, because like it does hold Midwestern values. And there's not a lot to do. Like, especially if you live in rural Texas,
in a smaller town,
I did, there's just not a lot to do. Like, and unless you're drinking in a field somewhere, which is hard to get the alcohol when you're 14. So
as it should be.
As it should be.
You shouldn't be drinking when you're 14 years old.
And like that. And so I think that's a lot of people's experience is like they either like go down this really weird party route at a young age where they're with their older siblings getting weed, getting drugs, like...
And they're like 14, 15.
Or you go down this really religious route. And one is like, oh my God, you're such a good kid. And the other is like, oh, you don't want to be a burnout. Which I feel like, in my mind, that's like all of America. But I'm thinking in like cities like Los Angeles, that's not really a thing. Like, there's so much to do here. You can hang out with your friends wherever. Like, you don't have to go to an abandoned field to like hang out with your friends. So I think like bringing it back to Texas, my experience was daunting and dark and like not something I would want other people to experience. But a lot of people do in Texas. And that definitely influences the politics. Texas is a red state. And they will stay a red state, even though pockets like San Antonio, like Austin, like Dallas are blue. The majority of people are like, killing babies is wrong. Gay people are an abomination, and that's what I encountered a lot.
Did you? And I'm curious. How much did you travel around the state, or was it really like you were in that town and that was kind of the world that you knew? And partly I'm only saying this because since Texas is just geographically so massive,
it's big.
I mean, other than Alaska, it is the biggest state in the lower 48 states. And again, it has a lot of people and a lot, different groups. I guess, like, were you just in different areas and you saw, again, like, certain through lines, or was it like, oh, I was in Houston, I was in Dallas, that was completely different from this, like, Texas small town where there is this, like, borderline, or full-on, like, cult level of highly fundamentalist Christian Pentecostal, understanding of the world.
No, definitely. I lived in San Antonio. I lived in La Vernia, and then I moved to San Antonio.
Okay.
When I moved to San Antonio, it was a little bit less oppressive.
Okay.
It was a little bit more like, like, I don't have to go to church to speak in tongues. I can go get frozen yogurt. And that's okay. And then when I moved to Dallas, of course, I went to the really uber Christian college. So I was encountering that through line.
Right.
But I was deconstructing. And so I would go get drunk all the time and go to Dallas and like sneak into clubs. I knew a couple bouncers that would let me in underage. And that was a lot of fun because I not only got to like party a little bit, but I met people who expanded my worldview. Mm-hmm. So like they were mostly men because, I was going there to meet men.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But they were like, oh, I'm a doctor and this is what I believe and this is what led me to this path. And I took all of that in like, oh, wow, like you can be successful without God. And that was really interesting. So it's not like every single person in Texas, especially in the big cities, feel this like, oh, you need to have God's hand on you in order to succeed. A lot of them did. But there were a few that really stuck out to me that I was like, oh, and you're not Christian. And they were like, no. And I was like, oh, and you're still successful. And that gave me a lot of courage when I decided to leave the faith. Yeah. But those were few and far between, even in big cities.
Even in big cities, it was still like, there was a sense of, pretty much people are Christian here. And again, whether that is, again, evangelical Protestant
like there was like a casual Christianity where they were like, I'm still gonna have sex, I'm still gonna drink, but like I know God is watching over me.
It's like, I shouldn't do it.
But like God forgives me and like I move on and God has blessed me with every good thing that I have. And every bad thing I've encountered is from the devil. And so there was a lot of that, even in big cities. It was just more casual Christianity. But there were outliers. And in Austin especially, I felt like there was a lot of outliers in Austin.
We're running out of time here. We got a couple more minutes. But are there any other sort of, before we wrap up, like last points that you'd like to get into, or just get off your chest, or just, I don't know.
What do you have in mind?
Well, at this point, we're so far into this conversation, and we're way beyond like generic questions I had prepped for you, which that's the point of this. Like I want to get into like the really, really good, the intense, meaningful stuff. Yeah. So it's more just like if there's anything you want to finalize.
I'll finalize some things in that what I've talked about is my personal experience. Of
course, yeah.
And there are some really good memories I have of Texas. And I love my family who lives in Texas. And there are really good people in Texas. There are not just crazy religious
fundamentalists,
Sure. There's some really good people in Texas who like really want to see their state thrive and support women and support, the gay community. Like there are people in Texas who do that. And they're not just transplants. There are people who were born there, who were raised there, who feel this way. And so that's something that I would like to get across is like my experience was dark and I have no love lost for Texas. But like there are some good things too. Like the food, incredible. Yes. Incredible food, incredible barbecue. People have a passion for food there. Like the nightlife is incredible. I love nightlife in Texas. It's very different from California, which is, I think, a little more pretentious in some ways. Where in Texas, it's more down to earth. And especially if you go to any country club, not country club, I don't mean country club as in like a golf course. I mean like a two-step in. They
just
pluck
like
a guitar,
just
it's
like
country.
A country bar kind
dirt
of.
floors, a jukebox that doesn't work. Like I've had a great time doing that. And I love the dancing in Texas. There's so much salsa, there's so much line dancing, and there's two-stepping, which is so much fun. It is some of the most fun I've had in my life has been in Texas.
Yeah.
So there is still really good things to do there, and there is obviously like a tourism thing in Texas that is good. It's not like you're going to be, you know, forced to convert if you visit Texas.
Well, nobody tried to force me to convert to evangelical hardline Christianity. I've been there 3 times, you know, maybe trip number 4. They,
Yeah,
you know, but
it's fun.
I enjoyed the 3 trips I took to Texas.
Yeah.
But, you know, but that was
It's
just
fun
me.
if you go there. If
That
you
was
go
just
there,
me,
if you
you know.
live there, it's a little dangerous, especially as a woman.
Yes.
But
yeah.
if you visit there, you know, go get barbecue. Go to a club where you can 2-step or learn to 2-step. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of fun to be had in Texas.
Yeah. Well, Payton, thank you so much for coming on. This was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for sharing this with me.
Thank you for letting me talk your ear off.
No, I mean, I that's why I'm here. I want to hear about kind of your life and your experience growing up here, and this has given me a lot of perspective also on certain aspects of hardline Christianity, which I sort of, you know, I've always grown up and was like not a fan, but you'd never get those specific cases of like, here's specifically what was happening and here's what people did, and so that's really informative for me to learn about it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Of course, and for all of you who made it to the end of the video, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Like the video if you get a chance. Leave a comment. We'd be curious to get your thoughts. Obviously, please try to be respectful. If you want to start a dialogue, that's totally fine. Just, you know, no internet trolls, please. We get it's, you know, the internet though, freedom of speech, that's fine. And we will see you next time.